Hey guys, welcome back.
We're excited to kind of just lean into some more practical application of influencing. And we're going to be doing it here with a scenario that actually came up on one of my presentations recently. How do I get my kid, my teenager, to go to youth group? So how do we do this without being manipulative parents, right? But at the same time, still being parents, right? And operating within our authority and doing it in a way that doesn't just get external compliance, but like invites the person to really choose, our kids to really choose something that's good for them.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. You're going to want to stick around and listen. So if you have any kids who are youth group age and above, this will be helpful for you.
But even the 3-part process that we're going to be presenting here is going to be something that you can apply regardless of the situation, regardless of the age of your kids, to stay in that zone of influence as a parent. All right, we'll see you in there.
Hi guys, welcome back.
Hey, we are continuing. Oh, you know what? We're kind of taking a little bit of a deviation, the path here.
I wouldn't say it's a deviation. I would just say it's a tangent.
I like it. Tangent. So we've been talking about influencing for these last couple of weeks, and even the predecessor of influencing, ownership. Both of those things have to go together. We got to own what's going on in our own interior life, surrender what's not going on in our interior life that we have no control over, and then how do we move from that place of zone of manipulation to zone of influence? What we want to talk about here is a couple of scenarios here, focusing specifically on parenting scenarios, because we get questions on these often. For
how do I influence my children?
Yes, like staying in that zone of influence. So like, what does that look like? You've moved out of manipulation. If you haven't done that yet, go back to episodes 160 to 164. You can learn about that. Here, okay, now I'm detached and I want to enter into an influential relationship with my kids. We're going to be giving you a 3-step process for that. Yeah. It's pretty good.
And it's a slippery slope when it comes to parenting, because you're kind of like, isn't it my job to be, to be like their guide and their, helper, and it can very, very easily go into manipulation, especially when your kids are developing their free will. They're actually in that phase of developing their free will.
Which is always. Like, it's just always evolving. And so kind of playing in the background of this influencer conversation is we need to be considerate of the level of agency that our kids have, like their capacity to actually choose their greatest good based on where they're at developmentally, right? How I approach a conversation with a 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old going to be vastly different.
Yeah, but a parent's role, especially when kids are younger and they're under the age of reason, but even as they're developing their free will, onto that real like adulthood place, you work as an operating helpmate, I guess you could say, for their intellect. And since their intellect informs their will, that's where you kind of step in wisdom.
Hopefully.
All right. In a very ideal world, you step in being that wise sage.
With your well-formed conscience.
Yes. Now, we know that is not always the case. But that's why looking back and listening back to those previous podcasts that we were just talking about is you doing your own work first, so that you can be that wisdom, that person of that is kind of informing their intellect so that they can inform their will.
Yeah. So I'm excited to share this 3-step process with you. It's really going to help you to find that common ground, which is pretty important, very important for influencing, to get people to do what you want them to do, or to humbly step back and kind of make space for yourself to be influenced by somebody else in that process. So it's like finding the greatest good, right? And
it's loving them.
Prayer and like bringing the Lord into this is always part of the process, because we cannot arbitrate what our greatest good is. We can only receive it and come to know it. And we have to be in our own relationship with the Lord with that.
Yeah. It's really loving them. So when we were talking about the different zone of manipulation, zone of influence, and we say love is obviously in the zone of influence. What does love look like? I mean, and I know that's like such a huge question and we're not going to answer it here, but like, what could it practically look like to a person who has a different, unique design than you do? And so that's really what we're going to be breaking down in practicals here, depending on your child's temperament. Now, I know if you have a ton of kids, you have a lot of different temperaments. And so it's really good for you to know, because what works with one kid will not work with another. And that's helpful for you to know as a parent. And also just that first step that I think we're just kind of assuming you already have taken. And so we want to encourage you to take this step, but get interested, get curious about your children's temperaments. Like, understand, be that, what did you say? The student, like the apostolate of the child. Be a student to what is going on in your child and their unique design. And obviously you would need to know your child's temperament before we go into this. But if you're just listening, that's okay. And if you want to apply it, go get your kid's temperament. Like, go find out what their temperament is.
Yeah. The Art and Lorraine Bennett have a great book, Parent, like the temperament God gave your kid. And there's even a little test that you can kind of just do on your kid's behalf in the back of the book to give you a little bit of guidance on that. But I think of this work that we're doing is, guys, like, this is the same work that marketers are doing. We just spent an entire day building out marketing personas, right? What's a marketing persona? It's a person that you're speaking to, knowing like what are their needs, what are their desires. You're really getting in touch with what these people are looking for so that you can offer something to them that's going to resonate. Same way with our kids. Whenever we're seeking to be influencers, marketers to our kids, we want to present it in a way that's going to resonate. And based on their temperament, some things may resonate differently than they would in a different temperament. Okay, so ultimately, at the end of the day here, this is going to lead, when you start to follow this 3-step process that we're going to tell you, it's going to lead to some greater peace, more respect, so I'd say more maturing conversations that are going to happen. And your kids are going to learn how to use their agency wisely, their free will wisely, okay? So we're doing this to help them cultivate using their free will wisely, right? When we manipulate, we may get external compliance. They may do the things that we're telling them to do, but interiorly they're rebelling and they're resenting. And as soon as they go to college,
they're seething.
Then it just all goes goes to crap.
It's human formation. This is what and we are being formed in the process too as parents, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. And a lot of us grew up in a home that was just like, hey, just do it because I said so.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's one way of getting compliance. I don't know if it's going to be a way of getting influence, right? Actually changing the person and getting interiorly on board and behind whatever you do. You may get external compliance with that. All right. So be a student of that. If that's your way of doing it, be a student of the outcomes of that. The 3-step process. All right. We like to give you acronyms where it works. I'm a military guy. All right. So that acronym we're going to give you for this 3-step process for staying in that zone of influence is GLOW. GLO. GLOW. All right. What's the G? You're finding a common goal.
Yeah, I'd break that down. It'd be like a goal of the influencer, and then it's identifying how we would bring somebody to that same goal as us. Well,
it really is like you can have your goal as the influencer, but the person being influenced, as you're seeking to influence, needs to share in that goal, or they're not going. You're just going to get external compliance at best, and not anything interiorly. All right. So again, we're going back. John Paul II. The foundation of a loving relationship are two people willing the same common good together of their own free will. All right. And again, this is going to look differently for kids that don't really have a very well-formed intellect, right? Before the age of reason, versus those teenagers that still not a fully formed intellect, but they have more agency, right? To the extent that we've helped them cultivate that. All right. So the first step, G, goal. L, we're going to be lessen those trigger conditions. All right. So every one of our temperaments, we have things that we really don't want, and boom, we're in those situations and we find ourselves reacting. And usually it brings up fear. That fear brings up defensiveness. And when they're defensive, they're closed, right? Yes. Go back to that pitcher analogy that we've been using. The pitcher pouring itself into an open cup of water. It doesn't happen, or doesn't work out well, when there's a lid on it. Yeah. Okay, so those trigger conditions, they'll close up like a clam. They'll put a lid over the cup, not open to being influenced. And when they're not open, guess what? You can't influence. You can't. Okay.
Yep. And then ultimately, Wait, keep going. Sorry. I didn't know if you want me to jump in.
Well, I was going to say step 3 is to,
is to interrupt. Number 3 is to optimize the ideal conditions.
Yes.
Every temperament has their own ideal conditions that actually improve them, like help them to live into their contributions, live into their strengths with greater ease and peace, really.
Yeah. I mean, think of say there's certain situations where you find yourself clamming up, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's certain situations where you find yourself more open, right? Say, for example, if you are a melancholic and you don't necessarily like a large room or a room that's filled with people that you don't know, that might be a situation, non-ideal conditions, you find yourself clamming up. Perhaps even a trigger condition gets you to clam up. Maybe if we move that melancholic into a room where they're surrounded by a few friends that they know, man, they're going to enter in some deeper conversations with them. They've got that trust and that rapport, part of those ideal conditions, and there's a greater openness that's there, okay?
Yep.
So that's really the process. 3 steps: glow, find the common goal, lessen the trigger conditions, and then optimize their ideal conditions. We're going to go into some scenarios here.
Yeah.
The first scenario that we have, and this actually came up recently when I was at a retreat. How do I get my kid, my teenager, to go to youth group? It's a fun one.
Yeah. Okay. You're also like, how do you phrase that question differently?
How do I get my kid to go to youth? Well, like one of the first things, and
how do you get them to want to go to the youth group?
Exactly. Before we get into glow, there's always like some foundational things to consider here. All right. The first one is like, consider, why do you want them to go to youth group? Why is it really important? Because oftentimes, or sometimes, the reason is, well, because my parents made me go to youth group. Ooh, all right. Like, do we really think that is going to be a very influential reason? Or does that sound a little arbitrary? The definition of arbitrary means without reason.
Yeah.
So it's not a reason. Because my parents did it, or because I did it when I was a kid and it was good for me. Well, we're getting better there, right? It was good for me. Maybe it'll be good for you. But first, consider your reason behind it. Second thing, and again, this is going back and applying some of that work that we did in episodes 160 to 164. Do you find yourself maybe doing this because like it just seems like the thing a parent should do? Right?
The shoulds.
Is this something that it's just like, okay, I want to feel like I'm doing my job as a parent. And so therefore youth group just seems like one of those good environments, and perhaps it is, right?
But that becomes more about you and your feelings than your child and their well-being. And I'm not saying that they are mutually exclusive. They can work alongside of each other. You can feel joy when your kid wants to go to youth group. But that's the key word, wants to. Not because you're forcing them so that you feel better at the end of the day. Yeah,
so if there's any fear behind, if my kid doesn't go to youth group, then evil thing might happen, and maybe that evil thing is a thought, I'm a bad parent, or I've caused a problem, or like done
or there'll be a drug addict later on in life.
So like just take those thoughts captive, right, and invite the Lord, and we got to go first. All right, that's step 1, being an influencer, is like we got to go first, and the Lord's inviting us to do our own work. Okay, but then like another thing to consider is like, what really is the goal of them going to youth group? And I imagine it's like, we want them to have an encounter with Christ.
Yeah.
Right? That's like really the transformative thing. And sometimes like that can happen at youth group, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Like maybe it's a terrible youth group. Like sometimes there are terrible youth groups. I'd say like by and large, it's a good environment. And
sometimes it scares them away from Christ.
Yeah. Right? It's just like, man, like it's like cultish or whatever. Like, so, but the reason I bring this up is if we look at the goal rather as encounter with Christ, then suddenly them not going to youth group isn't so scary, because it's not the only way that they can encounter Christ.
There's other ways,
right? And you can start to see some have some freedom in that, and perhaps the Lord is even inviting you to explore some of those other ways.
Yeah, if we were going to take an example of the melancholic who probably doesn't like big crowds, right? It's like, well, maybe their encounter with Christ may show up if you just introduce them to a half hour of Eucharistic adoration.
Sure.
Or meeting with one person, a mentor or something like that. So that's just something to think about.
My melancholic finds some resonance in that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do this. Okay. So the kid.
And I do like to say that, like, that being said, we recognize that as parents, it's part of our job is creating an environment where kids can have that encounter. That might be youth group. So we're going to move forward here with the presumption that we're seeking encounter with the Lord for the kids, and the youth group is a great place, arguably the best place in your neighborhood,
right?
In your circumstances for that.
Okay, let's do this.
Cool.
What is so here we go. We're going to go into the goal. The parent wants the kid to go to youth group. So what would the parent be asking themselves or asking their kid to kind of bring up and have those goals aligned a little bit?
Yeah. And so this is my scenario. Erin's going to take a second scenario in a little bit. So I might continue to talk more for the next couple of minutes. But the first thing when we talk about setting the goal, it's considering the person you desire to influence and how, even the way that they desire goals or the things that they desire.
Yeah, we have a podcast series on this way back. Not way back. It was sometime.
Better questions to ask?
Yes. Yeah. Better questions to ask. Better journaling questions to ask your temperaments. And that's kind of where we got this idea is there are certain questions that work better for different temperaments in order to come to a goal, to actually, decide on a goal. Yeah.
And really what I did for when I was kind of putting these things together is I took a look at our temperaments assessment workshop and I looked to the motivations. Where do people ultimately want to arrive? Because different temperaments motivated by different things. Okay. So if I was a parent that wanted to get my choleric, we'll start with the choleric. Wanted to get my choleric to consider, right, the possibility of there being some good in youth group, right? I might ask hey, what would a win look like for you in this experience? Or I might even ask hey, how do you want to grow through this challenge? Can we just say that this is this might, a challenge. Yeah. This might not be easy, but how do we want to grow through this challenge? So I know that growth is something that inspires or motivates a choleric. I know that overcoming a challenge typically something that inspires a choleric. I know that winning is something that will inspire a choleric. And so that might be a way of just bringing this up in language that he or she actually gets a little natural dopamine hit, right? When we talk about motivations, it's kind of the way that God designed us to get our dopamine hit. And dopamine is that joyful, excitement hormone.
It also moves you into action.
Moves us into action, right? And also it's a question that's inviting them to participate.
Yeah.
So a cleric does not like to be told what to do. Talk more about that in trigger conditions. So here it's an invitation into a dialogue. And folks, that's what influencing is always going to happen through a dialogue, right? Okay. All right. The other thing is what will make this worthwhile so you don't look back and see this as a waste of time?
Yeah, they hate wastes of time.
Hate waste.
All right, let's go to sanguine.
Okay. Sanguine.
What are the questions? If you had a sanguine child, what would you ask them?
Okay. What's the impact that you want to have on other people that you meet at youth group? How does that land with you as a sanguine, Erin? Because I know sanguines are they're bubbly. They're often high influencer naturally. They want to
here's
see
the thing:
excited.
You are not going to have to really force a sanguine to youth group.
Okay.
Unless if there's no cute boys there. That sanguine girl, right? Sanguine boy, no cute girls there. I don't know. Something like that. So it's hey, who are the people you can meet? Maybe there's people from your school. Maybe there's new people. That's a great motivator.
It's just somebody, say if your sanguine child does not have a good perception of youth group, maybe they think it's boring, right? Well, if it's boring, then it's how are you going to get them excited about it? So how do we move them from a place of there's nothing good here, that boredom is an emotion that's coming from a perception, that there's nothing fun that's going to happen here. And how do we jumpstart their natural inclination to seek fun or create fun?
I think another thing too is, and this might work for all the kids, but instead of kind of saying you're going to youth group and it's a permanent thing, and maybe this is just me because I'm a sanguine.
Yeah.
But it's let's just try it one time.
Yeah.
That's kind of, it's equivalent to the no thank you bite, that we have our daughter do when she's trying new food. It's you get one no thank you bite. But in this case, it's let's just try it for one time. We don't have to make any decisions to continue to go. At this point, you haven't experienced yet, but let's go.
Yeah, and that's an example of like lessening the trigger conditions or even moving into the ideal conditions. It's like, okay, let's just this doesn't have to be a long permanent thing.
Yes.
But we're just going to do it as an experiment. We're going to see what we can do in this time. It's going to be short-lived. It's not like in a way you're reducing the pain.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
So I'm jumping ahead. Okay, go ahead.
That's fine. No, it's helpful. It's a conversation. So so another second question. I wonder how you can create a way to make it fun for you and fun for others.
Yeah. Yep.
How does that land in terms of like, fun not only for me, but fun for other people?
Well,
is that
just
motivating for you?
Yeah, it's like, you want to enjoy the fun that you're creating. You don't want to just do it necessarily for others. You want to be in it.
Okay, cool. A melancholic. How might we word this for a melancholic? How can this be an experiment? Right? Like kind of awaken a little bit of that wonder, that desire to understand, to grow in some knowledge. How can we just treat this as an experiment? What would a successful experiment with youth group look like for you? And so again, like even that is like, it gets them outside of what success might look like. So that might be just a way of kind of leaning into the motivations for a melancholic. Finally, here on the phlegmatic side, might be like, what would really convict you that like going to youth group is good for you? Tell me what would make it really worth the effort to go to youth group. How's it land for you as a phlegmatic, Erin?
Well, phlegmatic's my secondary. I think the other one would be like, once again, the no thank you bite. They don't like wasting their energy, phlegmatics. And so it's kind of like, and they like consistency and they like certainty. And so maybe it's like, hey, is there anyone you want to invite to come with you? Like a friend of yours to come with you?
It's starting to get into the ideal conditions.
So that's kind of, but even in asking those questions, those are the things that you're kind of considering.
Yeah. And like if you
collaboration is another thing they love.
What's happening here is like you might be hearing this and having the thought, because I had this thought too as I was writing these down. It's just like, what if my kid just doesn't even want to engage in this conversation with me at all? Right? Like I'm asking these questions and they're just like, what would make it worthwhile for you? And they're just like, I don't know. Nothing.
Like, jump ahead to the LO.
Exactly.
That's where we're going.
Like that's how it moves in. So Erin already started to kind of weave in some things that might, improve the ideal conditions for the temperament or lessen those trigger conditions.
That will improve your questions when you present it to them.
Yes.
So like, hey, like, and so I don't want to, let's just move on.
Well, the whole, in the goal, maybe this is a better way of like, communicating what happens in this goal stage of glow, right? You are helping them to paint a picture in their mind of a good picture of an experience of youth group, right?
Yeah, you're helping to create a new association.
Yes.
With youth group, whether they have one or they don't at all, but they do have one if there's some resistance. They have some association with it.
Yes. Okay. So getting into L. All right, in this scenario, how do we lessen those trigger conditions? Again, trigger conditions put you in a place of fear. Fear closes your cup. You're not open to influence at that point, so we want to try to mitigate or avoid these as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are some triggers for the cleric?
Well, you mentioned it before. Like I hate wasting time.
Yeah.
I hate just like wasting. It's like there are other things. If there's something I can do better, like I don't want to waste my time.
Okay. What else?
So like. Even being able to approach it with like, hey, I know you don't want to waste your time. Like weaving that language into the conversation is just like, hey, I know that it's important for you to like, you don't want to just waste your time, or you've got other things that may be more important to you. Like that freedom to be able to set my priorities as a cleric is something where if you mention that, like I feel seen, I feel honored. Like, okay, yeah, like this person is seeing me. Another trigger condition. Being told what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So now,
like you're going to youth group, whether you like it or not. As long as you live under my roof, you're going to youth group. How would that land for a cleric?
It's just you might get external compliance, but you would get a lot of internal resistance,
or you might get punched in the face.
You're kidding. Depending on, please,
immediate
no
resistance.
violence here. But even being able to say things like, and here's a reality, folks. Like as parents, we can make our kids do things. I can make my kid go to youth group and we can do this, right? Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be open to it, right? So even though we can, in our authority as parents, make our kids behave certain ways or like do certain things, we don't want to just end there. We still want to consider, how can we do this? How can we create this experience, even if they're just kind of going along external compliance, knowing that is not the goal. How do we get them open to it as much as possible?
Well, and I think if you ask any parents out there, it's like, hey, do you want your kid to go to youth group, or do you want them to go to youth group and like it? Which one do you choose? Yeah. They're going to be like, the second one.
Yes.
Right? Like, because what that tells me as a parent is my kid is making better decisions, which requires formation.
Yes.
And this is our part as parents, as being formed by the Lord right now, and then helping form our children. We, in this influencing space, we are teaching them how to be formed, right? Like we're actually forming our kids by respecting their free will.
Yeah, we're increasing their agency. All right. When I say increasing their agency, it's their freedom to choose their greatest good. Okay. So in order to have an increased agency, you have to be free to choose, but also you have to have some knowledge of your greatest good.
Yeah.
And so that knowledge can come from us sharing it with them, teaching it to them, but also them experiencing it themselves, right? And they can go to youth group, but be completely closed off to that experience. So therefore they don't gain that experiential knowledge and they never know the good that it's there. So we want to, again, even though we can force some external compliance to some extent without violating our authority as parents, we still want to try as best as possible to have open people, right? So being told what to do.
What would you say?
How do we get, so I would try to soften it. I would say like, hey, I know I can't make you do something you don't, I know I can't make you want to do something that you don't want to do. I know I can't say that like you're going to go to a youth group and you're going to like it. I can't make you like this. And at the same time, I am your parent and I do desire for you to be able to experience an encounter with the Lord. And I see this as a really helpful or really good place to bring that about. I could be wrong. Like this might not be something that works for you. Like, and kind of like even presenting it that way, there's something where it's just like, okay, this isn't a person that's coming at me as an authority. There's a person that's coming at this seeking a good that perhaps a good I can get on board with.
Yeah.
Right. And this is, and they're not saying that this is definitely going to work for me because I'm different from who they are. Right. So there's something that just kind of softens that for me as a cleric. Right. Also, just being able to say, I know it's important for you to make your own decisions. Like that's another thing where it's like the cleric wants to be able to make their own decisions. Right. We think we're pretty good at it. And you want to make decisions that are going to lead to your happiness. Even just acknowledging these things is something that is you're giving the person the opportunity to be seen, and you're taking the opportunity to see the person and say out loud the things that you know that they value, and those things get to be part of the conversation. Even being said, like, I know when you do want something, nothing will stand in your way. Like it can be like stubborn, but like when you do something, nothing can stand in your way. And like I desire for you to take that passion and direct it towards something that really is going to make you happy. Even that, like there's something that if somebody was to say that to me as a cleric, be like, okay, yeah, this is a conversation I can see myself being part of. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Sanguine triggers. This is one I think like being judged or misunderstood is often the case. So like I never want to approach a conversation with I think this might go across the board for anybody, but I know this is one of the particular triggers that we find in sanguines. Like I want to invite them to kind of share their desires here because they get a lot. So even being able to say like, hey, this is what I'm desiring of you, but I really want to know like what do you desire here? Share your desires. How does that land as a sanguine? Kind of like lessening those
Yeah, I think that's good. Just an open place, but you might be there for a long time, just so you know, as a parent. You might be listening for a long time, which is great. But also, I think another thing, too, another trigger for a sanguine, especially when a parent is suggesting doing something new, something that they might think is boring or, you know, I think a trigger is feeling restricted, feeling like their freedom is being taken from them.
Yeah.
And so I think the approach would be similar to the choleric. Okay. But it's more like I think the sanguines are open to things being quick and easy and fun. Mm-hmm. So instead of being like, hey, I know that you can make the right decision and all that stuff, like you would talk to the cleric, the sanguine would be more like, look, I am not here to take your freedom from you. I do want you to try this because I think you'll actually really enjoy it.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, and it's kind of that simple, but like, hey, if you're not ready for it this week, like, let's talk next week and maybe you can bring a friend. That's kind of like, that's how I would influence this sanguine.
Sure. Love it. Okay. Melancholics. I think of a trigger condition for melancholics is this pressure to be social and engage in small talk. Oh, yeah. So it's like...
And new people. Like, people they don't know.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. And folks, like, this is like... It's like 41% of the population, some studies are showing. So the majority of the people that we're dealing with don't really look forward to engaging in new social settings, right? So just being able to take the pressure off of that trigger and being like, hey, listen, you don't have to be the most talkative one in the group. Like that's and kind of we're starting to paint a picture because they may have a picture in their head of like, I need to match the excitement of the youthful youth minister that's usually very sanguine and has a guitar, right? But just like, no, you don't have to, like, maybe it's as simple as just like asking one person an interesting question. Because even that starts to kind of move them into their contributions, their strengths, being curious about somebody else and like wanting to have a deep conversation and deeply see somebody, but be seen themselves. That might just be a way of saying like, hey, you know, it kind of lessens that trigger condition. I got to talk to a bunch of people. But like here, I can be just curious about somebody else.
I think even just giving them permission to be quiet and taking it all in.
Yeah.
Like just being like, hey, you don't have to talk to a person. Just sit there and listen and take it all in.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how you process things and give yourself like that room to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to be best friends with everyone. Maybe you talk to somebody, but that takes that pressure off where there's all of those ideals and pressure that they're placing on themselves.
Yeah. So we're continuing to like, in everything that we're doing here, folks, like we're changing the picture in their mind of what youth group is going to look like. Right. And so if they have a picture in their mind that is causing fear, right? That's a trigger condition that's being unaddressed at that point. Right. And so what can we do to kind of alter it and be like, hey, success would just be a wallflower. Right? Just kind of take it in. That's it. You and I can talk about it afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. You share with me what's meaningful or not.
Yeah.
You know?
Awesome. And finally, the phlegmatics. All right. So like a phlegmatic, a trigger might be a change in their environment or their routine. Right? Like that consistency. Now we're trying something new. New might be something that just causes some fear. So again, it's just like, you spoke about this already. Like maybe there's somebody that they already know that's there. Right.
Yeah.
So how can we bring some consistency into that image
or certainty
or some certainty into it where it's just like, hey, just like, you don't even have to talk to anybody new. Like just show up and hang out with, you know, Tim, you know, he's going to be there. Right. Yeah. Or like just going in a pair. That's something that works. Another thing is like unexpected changes for the phlegmatic can be like, again, fear erodes that consistency. And so what would it mean for you as a parent to just reach out to the youth minister and be like, hey, what's going to be going on this week?
Yes.
And just
that's huge.
Okay.
Can I pause here? Because I think Avila, in getting ready for school, she was dragging her feet, all this stuff, a lot of fear, you know, and that always happens at the beginning of every school year. There's a lot of unknowns. She's secondary phlegmatic, but I think it's pretty close to her primary, which is melancholic. But I noticed talking to her about the order of the day. Hey, what's going on today? What's like the extra class they do? They do extra, like, music or art or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what do you play at recess? So we're just kind of going through that certainty of the day. Mm-hmm. And I always know when she's feeling a little afraid. Now, I mean, she used to like flip out and scream and cry and cry and cry and cry.
Yeah.
And all the way to school, right?
Yeah.
But now I know if there's a little bit of fear coming up, I'll just be like, she'll ask me, can we talk about school today? And so just running through that schedule of like what to expect, and it kind of calms her down a little bit with that certainty.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like our melancholic, phlegmatic 5-year-old right now. But again, like this is... It took us a while, guys. Like, give yourself a little bit of grace and like not nail this right out the bat. Like,
and we have one kid.
Yeah, we have one child,
as opposed
right?
to
so
people with many.
Yes. So, but at the same time, God gives you the grace to still see, know, and love your kids. So, maybe you have more grace than we do. I think my sister has more grace.
Yeah, you need it.
We do.
You probably need more if you have more kids.
His grace is sufficient. Okay. So that's the lessening of those trigger conditions and some strategies there. Optimize those ideal conditions. So what are we doing here? We're just creating the environmental conditions for them to easily show up in the places where they feel confident and their strengths can show up. They can show up as their best selves, right? Okay. So from a cleric, it might be like, hey, this is what we're going for now. And we already talked about this. I think an ideal condition for the cleric is they want to be a part of the conversation. They want a seat at the table.
Because you want freedom to make the decision.
Freedom to make the decision, freedom to be part of the decision as well. So if I was to create that ideal condition for my cleric son or daughter about youth group, it might be something like, hey, we're going to start out, this is just going to be a 2-week commitment here. And then we're going to revisit this after 2 weeks, but like here also, and this is again ideal conditions to set goals and clear expectations for the cleric, clear expectations of what success looks like.
Yep.
If we're going to revisit this, this is what we're going to be doing. When you come home, I'm going to be asking you 3 questions: what did you like? What didn't you like? How can we make it better next time? And I want to have an engaged conversation with you on this so that we're growing together.
I think I would add one more question to that.
What?
I would add one more question and be like, what is your decision moving forward? That would be the final question.
Yeah.
What did you like? What did you not like? How can we make it better? And what is your decision moving forward?
Yes. Yeah. I do like that. But even like, and here's the thing, it's just like we always want to do this while honoring our position as the parent. Like this isn't a democracy at the end of the day. And we're talking about kids that are still living under a roof that we have like some legitimate authority over. Like if all of a sudden your kid's after college and they're outside of your house, it's going to be tough to kind of put demands and things like that or make people comply.
I do want to say, imagine how much more formed a child will be if a parent is discussing this stuff with them and giving them their level of agency that they already have, that has already been given to them by
Honoring
God.
That. Yep.
Yes. And so, right, like if a 5-year-old's like, I'm not doing that, whenever it's just really hungry and tired, we could kind of be like, well, that's not really a decision that counts. Like, let's...
Well, yeah, like you're not really operating in a place of even your limited agency that you have. It's
correct.
Been vastly eroded by a hungry
But we are
stomach,
talking about a teenager here, and I think that's actually a huge distinction.
Yeah. So like even this, like having this conversation with my cleric son or daughter, I would still want to be like, hey, like ultimately your father and I, your mother and I, we're the ones, we're making the decision here, the final decision, but we want you to be a part of it.
Yeah. Amen.
So like even that's putting a clear expectation out that like, hey, this isn't like, we're not handing over the parenting keys to you, but we are inviting you to be a part of the conversation and a big part of the conversation. Because if the answer is not youth group, it's still very important for you to cultivate this relationship with the Lord. Let's explore if it's not youth group, we're going to open up the conversation and see what does it look like. If it's not youth group, then what? Right? Because this is an important piece that we want to help you cultivate. Okay. So those are, it's for Clark, sanguine, ideal conditions. Even just like, hey, this doesn't have to be a heavy conversation. Like this doesn't have to be a fight. This doesn't have to be an argument. This doesn't have to be something where it's just like we can make this like super simple. That's part of it. And that's even leaning over into the phlegmatic, perhaps even. But like it's new, but you're good at new things and you're good at meeting new people. Just like sometimes just echoing back to them their strengths and their ideal conditions and being like, this is a place where you actually get to be in an environment that you already do really well in.
Can I share with you a story?
Do it, yeah.
When I was younger and I wasn't like the best athlete, like compared to my brother was like, he could like do anything. Like first time he ever played it, he would excel.
I don't like playing Chris in sports.
Yes, I know.
Unless I'm on his team.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Unless he's scoring for you, then the winner. But yeah, so I remember my dad my dad was like always really good at all of this stuff. And he was like, I was going out on the soccer field and he's like, hey, I just want to let you know, you're really good at acting. And I always was like a good actress, in the theater and everything. He said, what if you just acted like a good soccer player? And I was like, I can do that. It was like one of my best games ever.
Like Pele out there.
Yeah, it was so,
messy.
But that really appealed to my sanguine side where it's like also just wanting to be appreciated for your gifts. Like that is an ideal condition and acknowledged for your gifts and saying like, hey, you're not only like the frivolous one who likes to have fun, but like you do bring a contribution to the table.
Yeah. And like, think of that, like I see, your dad speaking identity over you. And this is something that it's a unique gift. I don't want to say it's a charism, but it's something we have a special authority as parents to speak yes. identity over our children, which is why it's so important. It's why it's so important for us to get curious about those ideal conditions. Because those ideal conditions reveal an aspect of their unique design that's hardwired into them. And so you're speaking something that is going to resonate powerfully with them, and it's going to be affirming to them, right? So that they seek those environments and that are where they're going to find that further resonance. And if you can do it and help them to find the healthy places to seek out that resonance, like that's good. That's helping them to find God's will for their life. Cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
The melancholic. Okay, so some ideal conditions for the melancholic. It's like when you get done with maybe it's just helping them to think through things, to process. It's like, hey, when you get done with youth group, like I want to create a little bit of time. Maybe we just go and we grab, for the first couple of weeks, we grab a coffee or we grab a milkshake or whatever, and I want to hear about your experience with it, and like I'm going to just create some space for it. And I promise that even if you hate it, I'm not going to try to change your mind. Or I'm not going to try to change anything about your experience. I just want to hear about your experience. That's something where it's like creates a space for the melancholic that knows what they're feeling and doesn't want to have their feelings changed until they've been seen in those places. It's like, okay, I can be seen here.
Yeah. And hearing what they have to say out loud, even, I think there's something that helps with that processing.
Yeah. And finally, the same thing with like the phlegmatic. It's just like, hey, I'm going to ask you about your experience, and I don't want you to tell me what you think I want to hear.
Yeah.
Right. I want to actually hear about your experience. Okay. So again, it kind of one of the phlegmatic loves to have somebody create space for them to show up authentically. Right. And again, this is a way that you can invite that phlegmatic into a conversation.
So even if they were to say like, Dad, I liked it, like what would you say after that?
I'd be like, awesome. Tell me more. Like, tell me about I want to hear why you liked it.
Yeah. I think that's the key word. Why? Can you tell me why you liked it? Why, because I think it's like they can kind of stay. Yeah. Like I want I don't know. I want you to be happy that I went, right? I think phlegmatics are also similar to the sanguines in that they want to be acknowledged. They want to kind of grow in that confidence and even just permission to be phlegmatic. I was just coaching somebody on this morning in our academy, and like there was this thought that in order to evangelize, I need to be like kind of mean to people. I don't know. And not mean, but just like, aggressive and abrasive and just be like, here's the truth, And I'm like, that is not how phlegmatics evangelize, like at all, and I would actually argue when a phlegmatic gives himself permission to evangelize, they're some of the greatest evangelists. I always think of St. Thomas Aquinas, who was like arguing people and winning arguments, and people still really liked him. Like they were like, didn't even know they were in an argument because he would steel man their argument and say, I see what you're saying. And and add this to this and this and this. And here, have you ever considered this though?
Yeah.
And that's, but even just, the reason why I went off on this tangent was like the phlegmatics, they have this peaceful way about them and they want to maintain that peace. And so just to be like, but I want to know why. I want to know why. I want to know why.
Yeah.
Why do you like it? Like what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. And that why helps them to lean into their contribution of great conviction, right? Acting out of conviction. And you keep asking why. What you're doing is you're helping them cultivate conviction around pursuing their greatest good, which we're assuming here is youth group, right? That's the case. So like the worst thing you could do for a phlegmatic is after youth group, ask them nothing and just like, and not cultivate that, because if they don't have the conviction, you're going to have to jumpstart that every single time. But once they get conviction, like they are locomotives. Once they have momentum, they are the most consistent, steadfast people.
They will be on they will be at every youth group scenario.
Yes.
Okay.
We're at like 45 minutes here.
Yeah,
I don't know if we got time. So why don't we wrap this one up and then we can take that next scenario. What's the next scenario that we're going to be working on?
How to get your kids to do chores how to influence your kids to do chores.
Chores around the house.
Yes.
Okay. Very common. So that'll be our next episode here, but just to kind of wrap up, we talked about getting in, like once you're in that zone of influence, how do you stay in that zone of influence? And we have our 3-part acronym, GLOW, find that common goal, right? And considering always the unique design and what's motivating your kid based on their unique design. Next, you want to lessen those trigger conditions that will bring about emotions of fear, right? And so we want to be able to lessen in those trigger conditions means understanding what they're afraid of and then helping to mitigate some of those things as best you can, or even remove those things as best you can. And then finally, the O, optimize their ideal conditions. How do we create those ideal environments where people just are excited to be a part of it? They find resonance there. And in this case, if we're doing youth group, right? How do we make youth group look appealing, right? As like it's stepping into the place that they were created by God to be a part of. Cool.
All right.
This is fun.
That was it. Oh, I want to add one more thing to this. Ultimately, guys, there is a surrender that happens here, right? Sure. So if you are doing all of these steps and you're like loving them and really giving them their free will back to them, which is right, like especially when they're older, teenagers. But there might be something in this for you. If there's still resistance, continue to ask the Lord, what is in this for me? What are you teaching me as my primary formator? You know, Lord, like you are my primary formator. Like, what are you teaching me here? And I think just having that to fall back on when things don't turn out the way that you want them to, or people don't follow this beautiful formula, like your kids don't follow this beautiful formula that we have laid out for you. So there's always, this entire thing is encapsulated with the Lord's perfect will for you and your children.
Yes, which is not for you to be afraid ever. Yeah. So even that stuff that's coming up with you that Aaron's talking about, often that's fear. There's some fear that's there. That is like triggers or trailheads, right? I love how you made that little thing, that little, what is it? Phrase, statement, saying. Yes. Triggers or trailheads, like that is the Lord inviting you to go down a path to uncover that fear, invite him in so that his perfect love may cast out that fear. And that is what's going to be, if that fear remains, it's going to be very hard to stay in that zone of influence. Okay. So that's our work to do. Great.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Cheers. Hey, thanks for sticking with us in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. If you like what you heard,
please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.